So far in this campaign, Pete Buttigieg has really been able to skate by without a lot of serious criticism or scrutiny, either from the media or really even from a lot of the candidates. I think a lot of the candidates just thought that, he would just sort of evaporate away, being that he has essentially no support among black voters or people of color, and that very well still may happen. But more recently, we've been seeing a lot more criticisms of Pete Buttigieg. So Pete Buttigieg was recently speaking at an event, and he got absolutely shouted down with the chants of Wallstreet Pete. I want to show you a clip of that, and then I also want to show you a clip of Joe Biden landing an attack on Pete Buttigieg. Then we're going to come back and talk about sort of what this all ultimately means for the state of the race.
Cannot risk dividing Americans' future further, saying that you must either be for a revolution or you must be for the status quo. Let's make room for everybody in this movement. And there's an American majority that is unified not just in who we are against, but in what we are for. Because we are for higher wages and the empowerment of workers. We are for honoring our troops by putting an end to endless war.
Well, because Pete Buttigieg has been nothing more, and he's a good guy. I like him. And he's a smart guy. But he's been the mayor of a city smaller than the city we're in now. And so what has he done? Who has he pulled together? Does he know any of the foreign leaders?
Your campaign put out a pretty tough video on the mayor earlier today that also referenced the fact that he had fired an African-American police chief and forced out an African-American fire chief. Are you basically saying that Mayor Buttigieg has a race problem?
No, I'm saying he hadn't been able to unify the black community. That's what I'm saying. The most senior member of the city council, African-American, I ever met, endorsed me. I never met him, never asked for his endorsement. And so I think, look, in order to win, George, you're going to have to be able to win states like Pennsylvania. You're going to have to be able to win Florida. We're going to have to be able to win a lot of places that, in fact, have very diverse populations. And so the assertion that he's ready across the board, I don't see it. I haven't seen it yet.
He's fired back today. The campaign said that the fact that you put out that video says a lot more about where you are in this race than his record as mayor.
Now, some of the reasons why Pete Buttigieg is now starting to face a lot more criticism than he was earlier is obviously because he did seem to outperform some of his polling in terms of Iowa. Obviously, we can't really seem to trust the results. We don't know really what happened. Bernie Sanders did win the popular vote both the first time and the second time, but regardless, a lot of the data seems to be wrong. The DNC is doing some weird, tricky stuff, so we don't really know at all what's going on, but at least the appearance of it is that Pete Buttigieg seemed to outperform his polls, and so Pete Buttigieg is, really going up in New Hampshire. He's really skyrocketed. I'll show you those polls in just a second, but the main reason why Joe Biden now is going after Pete Buttigieg is actually kind of interesting. It's obvious to just about anyone who's paying attention that Biden's campaign is falling off a cliff. I mean, you can see it right here. This is the RCP average for the betting markets. You have Bernie Sanders here in the blue, Joe Biden in the green, just falling off a cliff after his disastrous performance in Iowa, coming in fourth, underperforming his polls, right? That's the real kicker, because you could see a world where, look, Joe Biden didn't do well, but he matched his polling. Then it's like, okay, well, he's going to match his polling nationally. He's leading nationally. He's doing well in a lot of the Super Tuesday states, so he's good. That's not what happened. Joe Biden underperformed his polls, and he even lost voters from the first alignment to the second alignment, showing that his support is a lot weaker than it may initially seem. If you look at the RCP average for the national elections, Joe Biden is still in the lead. He's been taking a little bit of a dip recently, but he's also taken some dips previously in the past and gone back up. So it's not super clear. But it does seem to be the case that Joe Biden's support is a lot weaker than it may initially appear. I think that, especially with fundraising, Joe Biden isn't going to be able to, campaign and ultimately fundraise if he isn't able to perform well, especially now in New Hampshire. So that's part of the reason why Joe Biden is going after Pete Buttigieg. But the interesting part about this is this actually conflicts a little bit with one of the narratives which we sort of heard even, a couple months ago. One of the narratives which progressives were really pushing is that, well, obviously Pete Buttigieg doesn't ultimately have a serious chance of winning the nomination because Pete Buttigieg doesn't have, any kind of support in the African-American community, any kind of support among Latinos. He doesn't have any kind of serious chance of winning the nomination, but he could act as a sort of spoiler for Bernie Sanders because he had the potential of stopping Bernie Sanders from, gaining momentum in Iowa and in New Hampshire because he was polling decently in both of those states. And to some extent, that may possibly have kind of come to true in terms of Iowa. Whether or not it was rigged, again, we don't know. But, Pete Buttigieg does seem to be taking a serious spike here. But the reason why that doesn't seem to be the case ultimately anymore is because the facts on the ground really changed, right? So nationally, we saw Bernie Sanders really surging here. In any case, before even the Iowa caucuses, surging nationally, suggesting that he's really done a good job at consolidating both the progressive vote away from Elizabeth Warren here, and also consolidating, in some polls, it's showing that the number of voters who are saying that they, weren't leaning leaning towards any candidate at all, that number has shrunk while Bernie Sanders has been going up, suggesting that a lot of those voters who, just didn't have any position or any preference at all are now going towards Bernie Sanders. Part of that is why he's ultimately been surging. And so the fact that Bernie Sanders has been able to surge independent of any kind of winning, surging independent of winning Iowa and independent of winning New Hampshire, sort of changes the facts on the ground of that earlier analysis where, Bernie Sanders would need to win Iowa and New Hampshire in order to overtake Joe Biden. Now the analysis is essentially Joe Biden, once he falls off, Bernie Sanders is on top, and Pete Buttigieg now can, it's almost a role reversal where now Pete Buttigieg can absolutely savage Joe Biden accidentally by stopping him from ultimately winning. Because in terms of New Hampshire, Joe Biden needs to, at the very least, come in third, right? And previously, like here back in, or even just, this is just January, Joe Biden was ahead in the polling average in terms of New Hampshire for a little bit there over Bernie Sanders. He's just taken a serious plummet, taken a serious hit. And so Joe Biden now needs to come in at the very least third. If he doesn't come in third, he's absolutely toast. I'm going to be coming out with a prediction video, and sort of spoiler on that, I'm not convinced that he's going to be able to come in third. He might be able to, but it's going to be tough with Elizabeth Warren there, and Elizabeth Warren having sort of a home state advantage along with Bernie Sanders in terms of being from Massachusetts. Joe Biden, in other words, Joe Biden needs to be attacking Pete Buttigieg now, while previously he wasn't really attacking Pete Buttigieg because he didn't see him as a threat. Previously, Pete Buttigieg was able to ultimately stop Bernie Sanders, and, Joe Biden could then sort of surf it to the nomination, and so Joe Biden didn't really attack Pete Buttigieg. Now he has an incentive to attack Pete Buttigieg, and so Joe Biden's attacks on him really show just how the facts on the ground for the race has changed, that Bernie Sanders was able to gain momentum without ultimately winning a race, winning any of the races since he was surging before Iowa. The idea that Bernie Sanders has some kind of ceiling at like 20%, clearly that's not the case, right? That was the sort of wisdom given to us by the mainstream media. Clearly that's not the case. Bernie Sanders is able to consolidate that kind of support without the sort of media narrative coming from the ultimate momentum. And the last relevant thing to talk about here is how in that Buttigieg clip, when they were chanting him down as Wallstreet Pete, it just shows you how just about everyone doesn't like Pete Buttigieg besides Pete Buttigieg fans, right? If you saw there in the clip, there was a quick moment where it flashed to the Warren crowd, and Elizabeth Warren supporters were chanting him down as well. And so it really shows you how the left flank of the party is really, really critical of Pete Buttigieg at this point. Pete Buttigieg made a serious mistake when he pivoted away from Medicare for All and some of the other more left issues, which he was initially supposedly standing for. And that really, I think, does show you the ultimate limitations of Pete Buttigieg in terms of being a candidate. I don't think that he has any kind of serious viable path towards the nomination at this point. Really, all that he can do at this point is stop Joe Biden. So, well, it's interesting. So anyway, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.